Whispers in the woods. I never believed the stories about Black Hollow Woods. People in town called it cursed, said those who wandered in at night never came back the same. But I wasn't superstitious. I loved the woods. The quiet, the solitude. It was the only place I felt truly at peace. That changed last night. It started with a bet. My friend Mark dared me to spend the night in the woods alone. Just till sunrise, he said, smirking over his beer. Easy. I had camped before. This was nothing. Or so I thought. I set up my tent near an old oak, deep enough in the forest that no one would hear me if I screamed. Not that I planned on screaming. The air was cold, unusually so, and the trees stood unnaturally still. No wind, no rustling leaves, no crickets, just silence. I lit a small fire and tried to relax, but as the flames flickered, I heard something. A whisper. It came from behind me. I spun around, flashlight in hand, but there was nothing. Just trees stretching into the dark. I laughed it off, telling myself it was my mind playing tricks. But then I heard it again. Closer. I held my breath. A shadow shifted between the trees. My heart pounded. "Hello?" My voice barely carried. No answer. Then the whisper returned, but now it was inside my head. A low, rasping voice, curling around my thoughts like fingers. "You shouldn't be here." I bolted. I didn't grab my bag, didn't grab my phone. Just ran. The trees blurred past as I tore through the undergrowth. But the whispers followed. Wrong place, wrong time. The ground beneath me softened. My foot sank into something wet. I looked down, mud, thick and black, swallowing my leg up to the knee. A hand shot out from the earth. I screamed, kicking, clawing at the ground. More hands surfaced, grasping, pulling. Faces emerged from the mud, twisted, hollow-eyed, mouths stretched open in silent screams. I wrenched myself free, stumbling forward. The trees warped, their branches bending, reaching for me like skeletal fingers. I wasn't in the woods anymore. Not the woods I knew. This place was different, darker, suffocating, alive. And then I saw it. A figure stood ahead. Tall and thin, its face obscured by shadow. It tilted its head as if studying me. The whispers surged into a deafening roar. "You should have listened." The last thing I remember is falling, plunging into darkness. I woke up outside the woods, just as the sun crested the horizon. My clothes were torn, my hands caked in black mud. But the worst part, the whispers never left. The thing in the fog. I've always loved hiking alone. There's something peaceful about being deep in the woods, away from the world. No distractions, no noise, just me and nature. But I don't hike alone anymore. It started last fall when I took a weekend trip to a remote trail I had never explored before. The first day was perfect. Crisp air, golden leaves, the kind of silence that feels like a warm blanket. But as night fell, a thick fog rolled in, swallowing the trees, turning everything into a gray void. I set up my tent, ate a quick meal, and crawled into my sleeping bag, listening to the faint rustle of the wind. Then, sometime around midnight, I woke up. At first, I didn't know why. The woods were still. No wind, no animals, just silence. Then I heard it. A soft crunch of leaves, slow, deliberate footsteps. I held my breath, listening. The steps circled my tent, dragging lightly against the fabric. My mind raced. Bear? Coyote? But something about the sound was wrong. It wasn't sniffing or pawing, just circling, waiting. I grabbed my flashlight and knife, my heart hammering. I took a deep breath, then unzipped the tent and shined the light outside. Nothing. The fog was so thick I could barely see past my own feet. The trees loomed like ghosts, their branches reaching through the mist. Then I heard the footsteps again, this time right behind me. I spun around, but the light cut through nothing but fog. My gut told me to run, but to where? I was miles from my car, surrounded by mist, so dense I could barely see my own hands. Then the whisper came, right by my ear. "You're not supposed to be here." A cold breath touched my skin. I bolted. I ran blind through the woods, branches tearing at my arms, roots nearly sending me sprawling. The whisper followed, weaving through the trees, always just behind me. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The fog lifted. The night was silent again. My heart pounded as I looked around, flashlight shaking in my grip. Nothing. No footsteps, no whisper. Just the empty forest. I didn't sleep that night. At first light, I packed my gear and hiked back to my car without stopping. As I threw my pack into the trunk, I noticed something. The back window of my car was fogged up. And on the glass, traced by a single skeletal finger, were 3 words: "See you soon." The thing in the trees. I never should have taken that shortcut. It was supposed to save me time, a path through the woods that cut miles off my hike back to camp. But the deeper I went, the more I realized something was wrong. The air was thick, heavy, like I was wading through something unseen. The trees loomed too tall, their gnarled branches clawing at the sky. And worst of all, there was no sound, no birds, no insects, just the crunch of my boots on the damp forest floor. Then I heard it. A branch snapping. Not from me. I stopped, listened. Silence. I told myself it was nothing. Just an animal. A deer, maybe. I kept walking. Snap. Closer this time. I spun around, flashlight cutting through the dark. Nothing. Just trees, thick and endless. But my gut twisted, instincts screaming. I wasn't alone. I picked up my pace, breath coming faster. The trail was barely visible now, swallowed by the overgrowth. I pulled out my phone. No signal. Of course. Then came the whisper. A low, rasping sound just behind me. My stomach dropped. Slowly I turned, and I saw it. Something crouched between the trees, too long, too thin. Its arms dangled like broken twigs, its head cocked at an unnatural angle. Its eyes, if they were eyes, were hollow pits, blacker than the night around us. It grinned. I ran. Branches lashed at my face. My lungs burned. The whispering turned to laughter, dry, rattling, inhuman. It was behind me. It was right behind me. I hit something. A root. A rock. I don't know. I went down hard, my flashlight skidding away. I scrambled for it, heart hammering. The beam landed on the path ahead, and on 2 bare feet standing inches from my face. I didn't scream. I couldn't. The thing crouched, its joints cracking. It leaned in close, breath like rotting leaves. A voice slithered into my ear, too many voices speaking at once. "You shouldn't be here." The flashlight flickered, and the world went black. The hollow ones. I don't go into the woods anymore. Not after what happened. It started as a camping trip. Just me, my brother Jake, and our friend Matt. We picked a secluded spot deep in the forest, miles away from the nearest road. The first night was perfect. Clear skies, a warm fire, just us and the sound of crickets. But by the second night, something felt wrong. The woods were too quiet. No wind, no rustling leaves, just an unnatural stillness that made my skin crawl. Then we heard the laughter. Distant at first, like an echo through the trees. A child's giggle. Faint, playful. But there was no one else for miles. Jake laughed it off. Probably just an animal. Matt wasn't so sure. Man, that didn't sound like an animal. I agreed, but none of us wanted to admit we were scared, so we let it go. A few hours later, we were in our tents, trying to sleep. That's when I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, moving just outside my tent. I held my breath, listening. Crunch, crunch. Then, silence. I couldn't move. I wanted to call out to Jake and Matt, but something told me not to. Something told me that whatever was out there was listening. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Eventually, exhaustion won. I must have dozed off because the next thing I remember was a voice. Software right, outside the tent flap. "You shouldn't be here." My blood turned to ice. I sat up so fast I nearly screamed. My flashlight, where was my flashlight? Then Matt screamed. I burst from my tent, the flashlight in my shaking hands. Its beam swept across the trees and landed on something not human. It stood at the edge of our camp, half hidden in the dark. It was tall, too tall. Its limbs were wrong, bending in places they shouldn't, and its face, there wasn't one. Just smooth, pale skin stretched where eyes and a mouth should be. It turned its head at an impossible angle. And then more of them stepped out from the trees. I grabbed Matt. Jake was already running. We didn't look back, we didn't stop. We just ran, tearing through the woods, branches whipping at our faces. Somehow we made it back to the truck. We didn't speak, didn't breathe until we were miles away. The next day, we went back for our gear. Everything was gone. The tents, the firewood, even our footprints in the dirt. Like we were never there. I don't know what we saw that night, but I do know one thing. The Hollow Ones don't like trespassers. The Silent Grove. I've always loved the woods. The quiet, the isolation. It's peaceful, or at least it used to be. A few days ago, I found something I can't explain, and now I think it's following me. I was hiking a new trail deep in the forest when I came across a grove of trees that didn't belong. They were perfect, too perfect. Their trunks were identical, their branches didn't twist like normal trees, and their leaves didn't rustle. Even the air around them felt wrong, stagnant. Then I realized something else. It was silent. No birds, no wind, no distant rustling of animals. The deeper I walked into the grove, the more I felt like I had stepped out of the world entirely. Then I saw it. At the center of the grove stood a tree unlike the others. Its bark was dark, almost black, and its roots curled up from the ground like grasping fingers. But what froze me in place was what was carved into it. A name. My name. The letters were deep, jagged, like someone had clawed them into the wood. The cuts looked fresh. I stared at it, my pulse pounding in my ears. That's when I heard it. A single footstep behind me. Slow, heavy. I turned so fast I nearly lost my balance. The trees stretched tall and unmoving, their shadows long in the fading light. But I knew I wasn't alone. Something was there, watching, waiting. I ran. Branches tore at my arms, my feet barely touching the ground as I sprinted back to the trail. I didn't stop until I saw my car. I didn't breathe until I was miles away. But now I think I made a mistake. Last night I woke up to a sound outside my window. A slow, heavy step on the gravel. This morning I found something carved into my front door. My name. And behind it, the faint outline of a handprint. I don't think the grove let me leave. I think it followed me home.